Good evening. Can everybody hear me? Okay? Yes? In Stanford, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Oscar? So we're live streaming to our Stanford campus as well, so that they can join us on this very special evening tonight. That's right. Hopefully they can hear that too. Welcome to the Dodd Center. I'm Clement, I'm the director of the Dodd Center. I really appreciate you all joining us on what is an absolutely gorgeous September day here in New England. So I know we only get like 7 of these a year, so I'm really, really grateful to all of you for spending at least a portion of it here with us inside on this evening. And it is the 21st Raymond and Beverly Sackler Distinguished Lecture, so we're really excited about it. Of course, today also marks the 16th anniversary of the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. And so today we also commemorate the nearly 3,000 lives lost and the countless others whose lives were transformed by that tragedy that day. I remember myself, I was living in California at the time, right? So a long way away, not like those of you who are here who were touched quite personally, but nevertheless, I remember that the raw emotional response to that experience of shock, of fear, of sadness, of anger, and then in our best moments of compassion, of sympathy, of solidarity, and maybe even at times a sense of national unity. Now, that unity may have been more kind of apparent than real in many ways. I think there were many divisions that remained hidden even though they existed, but I don't think anybody today would for a moment use the word unity to describe our current context in the United States. As director of the Dodd Center, and the Dodd Center, we have as our fundamental mission the advancement and fostering of a culture of human rights. So as director of the Dodd Center, I have had occasion twice in the past 9 months to publicly reaffirm that fundamental mission in the face of administrative actions and policies. Administrative by which I mean the Trump administration's actions and policies that I believe directly contravene that mission. Now, you can read those statements on my website, or our website, the Dodd Center's website, but this is the first public event at the Dodd Center of this semester, so I did want to make 3 points, reiterate them here. The first is that myself, everyone else who works at the Dodd Center, is absolutely committed to making sure that while you're here and while you're in that space, you are secure from violence, from intimidation, and from hatred. We can't promise perfect security and safety from those things, but we are committed to delivering that as we can. So that's one point. The second is that we are, and have been over the past 9 months, redoubling our efforts to partner effectively with our stakeholders on campus and off campus to deliver programs that create a sense of belonging and inclusion for everyone in our community, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender or sexual identity, their nationality, or their immigration status. And we are committed to continuing to do that, again, as best we can. And then finally, I'll just say that the Dodd Center, and this has always been true, but it is especially true now, that we're committed not just to, we are the Thomas J. Dodd Research Center, to research in the classical sense, to promoting knowledge and understanding, but beyond that, we are ultimately, at the end of the day, committed to justice. And we'll do what we can in that regard. And it's, there are others obviously working on the front lines of this, putting themselves in harm's way. We're in a quiet little corner of Connecticut, but nevertheless, I think it's important to assert from the beginning that that is the core mission of this center, and I would hope at least a part of the mission of this larger university institution. So thank you for indulging me in that. So for that reason, this is perfect. This is a perfect night. This is a perfect opportunity. I'm really delighted by tonight's program with Justice Albie Sachs and filmmaker Abby Ginsburg. And they are joining a long line of other distinguished speakers in this series. The Dodd Center is really privileged and honored to host them, as we have been with their predecessors in this Sackler lecture series. And I want to take a moment to express my deep gratitude to Raymond and Beverly Sackler for their generous gift that established this lecture series over 20 years ago. I was saddened, along with many in the community, to learn of Dr. Sackler's death earlier in the summer, in July, after a brief illness. He was an impressive 97 years old, which is terrific. And it's also terrific that he leaves behind him a legacy of family, of friends, of a remarkable professional and scientific accomplishment, and together with his wife Beverly, a profound impact on the University of Connecticut through their generous philanthropy. So in addition to this lecture series, the Sacklers helped to create the Artist in Residence program and music composition programs, as well as a kind of unique collaboration between UConn and the Metropolitan Opera at the School of Fine Arts. And then at the UConn Health Center, they supported really cutting-edge work in genetics and molecular science and regenerative medicine, and helped our scientists work at the intersection between biomedical and engineering sciences. So their impact has really been profound. The Sackler Lecture was one of their earliest contributions to the university, and if you know anything about UConn over the past 20 years, so, sorry, hold on a second. So Oscar, can you hear me? Can you stand for this? Because we can kind of hear you. Can you mute your mic until we get to the Q&A? It's a beautiful thing, right? Houston. They helped preside and usher in a transformation not only in these particular corners, but across the university. This is a very different university than it was in the mid-1990s. And it's because of the engagement of the Sacklers and folks like them that have allowed us to grow this program. And specific to the section of the UConn world that I live in, that impact has really been unmeasurable, right? The Sackler Lecture Series was established in 1993, as I said, one of their first gifts to the universities, and it is the longest running human rights program of the University of Connecticut. By bringing to campus the leading scholars, activists, policymakers, judges, and other luminaries of the human rights world, the Sackler Lecture Series helped to catalyze what I think is fair to say is the leading human rights program in the country. Right? We have grown over these 20 years into a large, interdisciplinary, very active, very engaged community centered on the Human Rights Institute, headed by my colleague Kathy Liebel right there, where we have a large undergraduate major, a graduate program, we have interdisciplinary faculty. Again, and I love to stress this, we have interdisciplinary faculty not only in our School of Law, but our School of Education, our School of Social Work, our School of Business, and all across the humanities and social sciences. So it's a really robust and terrific program. For our part, the Dodd Center concentrates, as I said, on fostering this culture of human rights, and we particularly focus on K-12 human rights education in that initiative, and our Business and Human Rights initiative, which is currently headed by my colleague Stephen Park in the back of the room there, which is, again, another unique interdisciplinary combination. Later this semester, I hope you'll all come back and sit in these exact same seats when we'll also award our Thomas J. Dodd Prize in International Justice and Human Rights to a really phenomenal organization, Physicians for Human Rights, which is doing amazing work, as you might expect an award winner to win. So the intellectual and cultural engagement that the Sackler Lecture brings is a key component to the energy and excitement that, that really propels the human rights program here at UConn, and I think really informs our feelings tonight about what we're about to see. In a moment, we'll screen the film Soft Vengeance, Albie Sachs and the New South Africa, on the screen behind me, which is made by the award-winning filmmaker Abby Ginsberg. Following the film, we'll have an opportunity to engage in a conversation with Albie and Abby up here. Now, short biographies appear both in your program. You can consult Abby's in a minute. Albie's will actually be screened here quite extensively. But I wanted to highlight a couple of items about Abby in particular. I'm delighted to say that this is the second time I get to welcome her to the Dodd Center in less than 24 months. She was here previously with an earlier film called Agents of Change, which was a documentary that focused on the 1960s Black student movement on particularly the San Francisco State campus and the Cornell campus, which led to the founding of Black Studies programs and really fostered the kind of original push within higher education to have inclusive, multicultural programs. It's really an incredible film about higher education and our role in larger social change movements. The second is that her broad engagement throughout her career with human rights subjects demonstrates not only her commitment to social justice writ large, but epitomizes an important and effective form of human rights practice, right? Or doing human rights work, which I think oftentimes gets conflated with legal work. And of course, that is an important and essential component, but nevertheless, I want to really emphasize the way that this Sackler Lecture is not simply about the incredible life and story of Justice Sachs, but is also about the role that film and storytelling more generally can play in these movements. I also want to put in a plug for her newest film, which is just released, which is quite personal to me in some ways. It's called And They Came for Us. It features George Takei and other Japanese Americans who were interned during the Second World War under Franklin Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066. It hinges on the newly discovered photographs from WPA photographer Dorothea Lange, and is unfortunately incredibly timely as we connect once again to the questions of who is and who isn't a full American, what rights do they deserve, why, and how. It's won an Accolade Award already for its social justice context. And so at the end of the day, I guess this leaves us with the lesson that cultural change, if that's what we're after, requires cultural work as well as legal and political work. And Abby's mastery of the documentary form is an impressive and important contribution in this regard. Justice Sachs is, of course, an archetypical human rights practitioner. The film will be a much better introduction to him than anything I could say about him. He is a legendary figure in this struggle. But there is one more thing I want to say prior to rolling the film, and I promise I'll do that right afterward. It's that this event was actually supposed to take place last fall. It was all set to happen, and circumstances intervene, as they sometimes do when you plan events like this, and we had to scratch it and then revisit it this year. If you had come a year ago, if the two of you had come a year ago, we would have had a wonderful screening, we would have had a tremendous conversation, we would have dug in on the rich history, legacy, and current questions of South Africa as it attempts to grapple with its past injustices and struggle toward a more just future. Today, I think it's fair to say I am desperate to have this conversation right now. I am absolutely desperate, and not because I don't want to know more about South Africa, which I do, but because I want to know more about us in the United States at this particular moment in our history. So I am tremendously excited to have this opportunity to talk with you, Justice Sachs, and with you, Abby, and to have the benefit of your experience, your wisdom, your intelligence, your wit, as we negotiate what I think is the most serious political and social crisis this country has faced in the past 50 years. So thank you both for being with us tonight. Thank you all for being with us tonight. And without further ado, then I'll roll the film. All right, there may be some ado, as I figured this out. Okay.
Lights.
Yeah. That was the filmmaker, by the way.
Yeah.
Wonderful for me.
They can hear you, right? You can hear us.
Yes. It's been wonderful for me to be part of this audience. Yukon, for most of my life, was a place up near Canada. People look for gold in the snow. And then Yukon was changed. Professor Ben Magubani was here for many, many years. And we never quite knew what Yukon stood for. And he was given a place to work as an historian. He became an outstanding academic. And we linked up with him. He'd come to conferences, people coming to the States would meet Comrade Ben. And this place was put on the map. And seeing the film here just links me with yourselves today, and hearing that wonderful presentation at the beginning, to feel that spirit and that vitality and that energy. For me, this is absolutely the right place. Abby and I have seen this film in many different settings, and we should have been here last year, and I got an invitation for something that I literally couldn't refuse, and I had to say no. But it's like the time has gone very quickly. And events in my country and events in your country since then give this a kind of a texture and a resonance that I think, and now I want to pay tribute to Abby. Just seeing how beautifully that film was crafted. The editing, the movement.
Yes.
Just a few words that I wanted to say. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you. We're delighted. Abby, do you want to?
No, is my mic on? I can't tell. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to say how glad I am to be here. It's always nice to come back to a place where you've shown a film before. So
yes.
It's particularly meaningful for me to be here with Albie. We haven't seen each other in almost a year, or more than a year. And that's very rare, because we used to see each other every couple of months. So it's very nice to be here together. Thank you for having us.
Well, you're very welcome. So we have about an hour. I think the format we're going to use, I'll ask a few questions. I'll just take the prerogative of being on stage, and I'll privilege my own questions here for a little while. But then immediately we'll want to turn it over to all of you, and I'm sure there are many questions. We've set up microphones at the end of the aisles. We'll ask you to come down and queue up for those a little later. So, and that'll take us to about 6:30. So there's plenty of time for some rich conversation here. But I'll start with an easy one as possible. So why did you need? I learned you've known each other for quite a long time, and Albie's life has been extraordinary for a long time. But you chose to make the film now. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to make it now, and what it would have meant maybe if you had made it 10 years earlier.
I think the key thing was that I had not been to South Africa till 2009. And when I went to South Africa, I was working on HIV and AIDS issues back in Oakland. And I actually went to South Africa thinking that's what I was going to make a film about. And then I realized, boy, was I the wrong person to be making a film about, you know, something that you really had to be living there and understanding a lot of, I mean, Albie talked about it earlier today. The issue of AIDS was very contested territory in South Africa. So once it was clear I wasn't doing that, I thought, okay, I came just to see South Africa, and Albie and I saw each other right towards the end of my trip. And a little light bulb went off as I was saying goodbye to him. I was like, Albie, what would you think about the idea of my making a movie about you? And I actually thought Albie was going to say, great idea. It was not what he said. He said, I don't really know what I think about this. He said, I want to see your other work. I said, I happen to have it right here. And I left him 2 films that I had made about an African-American judge and a Latino judge back in California. And I left him the films, and he'll tell you what he was checking them for. I said, but if you're willing, you know, to consider this, I really would like to make the film. And my criteria for making a film is this, and it functioned for all my other films. And that is that I'm always interested where biography meets history. So that a straight biography to me is not interesting, and I feel like a biography can illuminate history. And so that's one issue. And the other, maybe more important, is I'm looking to spend 5 years usually of my life making a film about somebody who inspires me. And Albie definitely fit that category. But when I met Albie in 1974, A, I was a law student, and B, I didn't have any idea I'd ever be a documentary filmmaker. And somehow the moment was right because Albie was leaving the court. 2009, he was about to be done with his 15-year term. And I don't know that I could have made this film if he was still in the court. Probably not. So that, you know, timing conspired, and it had taken me all this time to get to South Africa, and I fell in love with South Africa. I was already in love with Albie. I thought this could really come together if I could figure out how to raise the money. So it was, he is somebody who has inspired me my whole life. And, you know, and the story that I could see telling, as I say, was this mixture of history and biography. And it would force me to learn a lot about South African history, and I was kind of game to do that at that point. So that's what sort of drew me to the film. And one last thing I want to say. I don't make the films about Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, or Nelson Mandela. But I like films in which they get to appear. So Nelson Mandela got to be in this film. Martin Luther King got to be in my film about Belton Henderson, and Cesar Chavez was in my film about Cruz Reynoso. Because you're telling a story about somebody who's nobody's ever heard of, or most people haven't heard of. And at the end of it, I want people to say, gosh, I can't believe I never heard of that person. Or I'm surprised I didn't know his full life story, or whatever. So that's how I came to make this film.
Wonderful. So we're going to pause for a technical piece here. So, Abby, can I get you to check your microphone?
Oh,
make sure that it's on. Yeah, I'm not sure if they can hear. Okay, I'm happy to. So excuse us for a moment here. This is totally appropriate.
Mic check.
Okay. Yours looks on.
Okay.
All right.
They say it's on.
All right. Let me. Can we check in the back to make sure the mic volume is up on both of those? Albie, yours looks on as well. I can't hear
No, all right.
either of theirs. Okay, we're going to plan B, which is to say handhelds.
Okay.
My apologies. Actually, Albie, I'll give you mine because I know it's working. That is not.
We were struggling for one person, one vote. Now it's one person, two mics.
Test. All right, that one looks like it's working.
Testing 1, 2.
Okay, terrific. I think Yes, all right. Thumbs up in Stanford? All right, great, excellent.
I
Okay.
always love it when the leader of the developed world has technical faults. Thank you.
Okay, so the next question I want to ask actually Albie, and we see this at the very beginning when you're deliberating with your colleagues in the ANC with respect to the use of torture by the ANC currently while it was in exile, but then also your work with the Constitutional Court. One of the challenges following the end of apartheid, as you say in some of your writings, is to reconstruct the moral community. Not only to reform the institutions, but to reconstruct the sense of right and wrong across the society. Can you say your perspective on the role of the law in that work? Because the law can just be technical, it can be neutral, it can be looked at as a document whose morality could go either way, right? But as someone who's deeply engaged in this, what did you imagine the role of the law could and should be in that reconstruction?
I'd never been a judge. I'd never even imagined being a judge. Probably hadn't even wanted to be a judge. I'm fighting in a country where we had lots of law in South Africa. It was rule not of law, ruled by law. It was all done apartheid, under the law. And so I had a kind of resistance. I was glad that there were some decent judges. It meant you could expose torture, you could argue cases, you could make your clients feel they're human beings, the advocates standing up and judges treating them as human beings after they've been almost destroyed in solitary confinement, torture, treated as though they're just pieces of rubbish. But I never imagined I'd be sitting up there one day. And I kind of thought back, as a law student, I would write the exams, listen to the professors, they'd speak about justice and equality and fairness and equity, and I'd write justice, fairness, equality, equity, and I'd pass the exams, and they believed in those things, but they wouldn't give their life for it. I go down into those shanties, you saw some of the shanties in Cape Town then, at night, there'd just be candlelight. It's something very expressive. You just see the whites of people's eyes and their teeth, and you're speaking. And these were poor people. They hated the law. The law was the enemy. The law chased them, threw them into vans, chucked them into jail, go to jail for debt. It wasn't even just apartheid. The law was for the rich and not for them. And so I felt very, very torn. And I felt torn. It wasn't only racism, separation, segregation, and so on. It was also the inequalities built into the law, more or less all over the world. And it tore me apart. It was only when we came 20 years more later, 30 years later, to write the Constitution, that suddenly I realized these grand phrases of the ages actually had meaning. The poor hated the law, but they would give their lives for justice. The lawyers, the professors loved the law, but they wouldn't give their lives for justice. Now we're going to get a constitution, and the grand phrases of the ages became important for the poor, for the people, to bring us together, to give us a country, to look at everybody equally. At the same time, the passion of the poor became important, to invest meaning. And I discovered very, very quickly when I became a judge, you settle disputes, but that's not even your main job, to settle disputes. You're dealing with fundamental morality, political morality of the society. And when I visited the US Supreme Court for lunch one day, I mentioned this earlier today, marvelous conversation, terrible cuisine. I was asked the first question by Justice Alito, Justice Sachs, would you say the Constitutional Court is an activist court? And I said, yes, Justice Alito, it's an activist court, but we have an activist constitution. The Constitution, you saw some of the preamble there, it speaks about the injustices of the past. It speaks about achieving equality. It's got fundamental rights, non-racism and non-sexism. It's a vibrant, forward-looking, transformatory constitution. And that was part of our role there. So for me, there was a direct connection. If I wanted a little stepping stone, 1991, I'm back in South Africa. You saw after 24 years exile, I'm giving an inaugural lecture at the University of Cape Town. And it opens with the phrase, "The beautiful people are not yet born." And the next statement is from, that was from a Zimbabwean writer who picked it up from a Ghanaian writer. The disappointments with independence. I'm saying that in 91. And the talk was entitled Perfectibility and Corruptibility. You aim for perfectibility, the idealism. You guard against corruptibility. It's all in the same constitution. We saw that as part of the job. And the second sentence I quoted was from Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Some of you might know him, the Kenyan writer. And he said, "A rich man's fart smells sweet." That's not normally the opening statement in an inaugural lecture. But I was really wanting to drive home, already now returning from exile, that the Constitution is to deal not only with the crimes of the past and transforming society, to deal with ourselves and our potential for corruptibility. And what thrills me now is to see how well our court is standing up, our elections are there, they're meaningful. We have somebody called the Public Protector, based on the Ombudsman. We didn't like the sexist or patriarchal terminology, but we didn't want an imported thing, so we call it the Public Protector. All these institutions are functioning. And then the Constitutional Court is just one of a whole series of bodies there to pick up that code of conduct against torture was really a kind of Bill of Rights for the liberation movement in exile. I think unique in the world. But that was Oliver Tambo, his leadership, and I see a continuity from then until this very moment when I'm sitting here talking to yourselves.
Thank you. So from law and morality to truth, that's the next question I have. We talked a little bit about this in the talk you gave with the students in Maliland's International Human Rights course earlier. And you talked about the four types of truth that you discern through your experience with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, really. But I'm also concerned or interested, Abby. We have a few documentary filmmakers who come through the Dodd Center from time to time. One of them's in the audience with us. You're also a profession obsessed with truth in many ways. And this film and the documentary films that we screen are always engagements and meditations on how we tell the truth in a way that doesn't simply pretend that the film is transparent, is a transparent truth. And I'm wondering, in the four kinds of truth that Albie outlined,
You'd have to do it again.
which time, right?
Right.
Who was in the class earlier with Professor Land? Does anybody recall what the four types of truth were?
Molecular.
Logic, dialogic, camera.
Experiential, right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you see your truths as a filmmaker reflected in those, or is there a different rubric for
I
that?
think I have it. I think every filmmaker sort of faces, the issue of what is the truth of what I'm telling, recognizing that it is mediated through your own perspective. Okay, so so I'm struggling with truth, but I know it's my truth. And in a way, Albie and I had to work through his truth versus my truth. Because there were some things I either didn't put in or didn't want to put in that Albie felt were part of his, quote, life truth, And so that becomes an issue for anybody when you're making a biography, what you're leaving out versus what you're putting in. So I'm just going to give a couple of examples of things that sort of came up for me. One was, I knew I wanted, if I could get him, Henry in the film. I just felt like my truth was, if I could have Henry in the film, I'd have a more, dynamic isn't exactly the right word, but I'd have some conflict sort of built into this. And it would be my chance to get someone to talk a little bit about what it was like to be a security officer, on the wrong side, in my opinion, of the South African struggle. So I was very interested in that. I'll tell you one very quick story because it relates to social media. So, but I was afraid to tell Albie initially that I wanted Henry in the film because I didn't know what Albie's reaction was going to be. And I was like, I can't really do this if he thinks it's a terrible idea. So I thought my job was to find Henry on my own, which I go do. So I do a Google search and a Henry van der Weisthuizen comes up. That Henry, they say, I can reach him through, if I expand my LinkedIn profile, blah, 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 pay $10 more, I can send him a message. So again, I haven't mentioned this to Albie, I do that. And I say, I'm making a film about Albie Sachs, and I understand that you were involved in the attempted assassination on Albie Sachs, and I kind of go through the whole thing. And I get back a response from somebody named Henry van der Weisthuizen saying, I'm 31 years old, I never heard of Albie Sachs, and I promise you I had nothing to do with this attempted assassination. Try again, you know. Then I had to talk to Albie about making this happen because I was like, okay, I'm at my wit's end, I don't know how I'm going to find this guy. And Albie was able to help me locate a decent email for Henry, and then Henry agreed to be in it. But, I mean, again, that's sort of, so I'm pursuing, I don't know whether you call it my truth, but I'm pursuing my, you know, kind of vision for this film. And, you know, decided I didn't want Albie to know about it right away. There are other things where, you know, I mean, I wasn't afraid of misrepresenting Albie, but I think that, you know, it requires a lot of trust between the subject and the filmmaker to get it right. I mean, it requires a lot of trust at the beginning. That's what Albie was looking at my earlier films to see if he could, quote, trust me. And then there was going to be a process between us that happened throughout the entire, you know, 3 years that the film took. And I would say the trust grew between us and we began to really understand how to collaborate and so on. But I'm a little, as a filmmaker, I'm a little protective about, you know, sharing what I've got with him. I was a little protective of telling him I didn't think his first interview was so great. I didn't want to say that. I thought he'd never agree to be interviewed again. You know, so it's like, this isn't exactly about truth, but it is about negotiating what in the end is going to lead to the truth of your films. And that became, here's one thing that Albie felt was not true, and I needed to really follow his lead on that. I had an idea for an ending sequence that involved Albie, Vanessa, Oliver, and a film crew coming with me to a barbecue joint in one of the townships. And they agreed, and we went, and I had a notion that this could maybe be the ending of the film. And Albie felt, since he had never been there before and was probably never going to go there again, it was a misreflection of who he was and what he was doing and so on. And he was just like, that doesn't work for me. And at that point I felt that, you know, quote, my truth in the film and Albie's truth were at opposite ends, you know, were in opposition, and I needed to really respect his truth. So that's, you know what I'm saying, you're making a lot of choices as a filmmaker about kind of the truth of the story. I was just talking with another documentary filmmaker who's here today, and sometimes we as documentary filmmakers go down a road because we as people are interested in it, and in the end it doesn't serve your film. So you are constantly trying to figure out, how do I stay true to the story I'm trying to tell, to the authentic lived experience of my subject or subjects, and to make it enjoyable for the audience. Because if I bore the hell out of you, I have failed, and it doesn't matter what else I've done in terms of truth. So it is a juggling act, and think of it as sort of, you know, 3 or 4 balls in the air that you, the filmmaker, are constantly trying to work out. But if you don't hit the truth thing right for the person whose biography you're doing, you've blown it.
If I can just add, another dimension was who you're making the film for. And you were thinking initially of an American audience, and that's great, you guys are great. You don't have to be great again, you're great already. I'm thinking of a South African audience. Not for selfishness, but the impact of the film could be much more significant there. Here it's kind of mobilizing, it's interesting and so on. There it's part of our narrative and our history. And then little things that to you wouldn't be important, I could say, and then that just triggers.
Do you remember one of them? There was a logo on Albie's hat in the last Run to the Sea. Do you remember that? There was an ANC logo, and he said, you can't have that in the film. somebody's gonna notice it, and it's gonna put me in, you know, it's gonna have something to do with how people are gonna see me. Get rid, and so we blocked it out. But I mean, that, I never would have caught that in 1,000 years. I mean, that's just one tiny little.
No, the only problem there was, I mean, most of my life was in ANC, and I think it was a privilege and it's fantastic. But as a former judge, I mustn't be partisan. Hot cases are coming to the courts now, and I didn't want my colleagues on the bench to feel, you know, that they're in a corner, that people seeing it say that we don't stand a chance because the ANC has made up its mind. So we had to
That's
discuss
just a
that.
good example.
But you know, when it came to right at the beginning, would I trust you? Of course, I would trust you in terms of integrity and concept and feel. Could I trust you artistically? I didn't know. I knew that you'd been our supporter for years. I had to see, is it a boring, clunky, didactic kind of a film that after 2 minutes you say, okay, I've seen that, it's enough. And what I liked was the other two films had a lyrical quality and there was a flow. And you're not trying to dramatize and imagine audiences are a little bit dumb and you have to tell everything, you know, straight on the nose and so on. So that's what I got from the early films. We were fighting all the way through, but that was part of that dialogical thing. And very interesting interaction. And I think very productive. Partly fighting the North American perspective, South African, partly sometimes even aesthetic. I think the guy who did the editing,
Ken Schneider.
yeah, in the end did an absolutely fabulous job. Once he picked up, then you had to work in little bits of narration to come in. I think I was quite beautiful and helpful. And it really worked very, very well. And this film stands up. You know, some films, they depend upon the timing and what's happening in the country and in the world that's in the air. They invest an extra dimension. Without that, they look a little bit odd, a little bit like retro, a little bit period. They might become real retro afterwards. Well, this film, I think, has got a living quality because of the way it was made. It makes it as relevant today. People thinking about Charlottesville and so on can see this film and maybe make little connections. It's sad. Part of the relevance is sad. The battle against racism is still, in our country, very strong, in this country, very strong. But it's the quality and the integrity of the filmmaking and the willingness to listen, I would say on both our parts, and to put in that extra time and to refilm and to do something again. And I feel a kind of embarrassment about the long interviews I gave at the beginning, but I had to get it out.
Yeah, and I knew he had to get it out.
I had to make that narration, that long story, you know, to see what stands up. You used a few little snippets from early on. There was one that was very tough. It was in Berkeley, I think. No, not in Berkeley. In Cape Town, baking hot day, the sweat was pouring down. They had to wipe the sweat away and so on.
And he went on and on and on for, you know, about 8 hours. You know what that looks like in terms of transcripts? But he got it out.
Should we pick a fight again?
This is very exciting, yeah, and it's a great act you guys have. But no, it's a tremendous collaboration, and I think the proof speaks for itself to both the film and on.
Can I just make one observation that when Albie said, you know, he was thinking about the impact of the film in South Africa, I couldn't possibly have thought about that because I didn't know South Africa well enough. And two things that we did with the film in South Africa really provided, I think, at least real meaning for me, I want to say. We made a special effort to get the film to universities that people normally don't travel to. So it was a huge deal that a former constitutional judge was coming to some of these places that were quite far away from, you know, where the airport was and so on. And we got a really great response. And some of these universities are largely black. So it was very meaningful to me to be able to just observe the impact of the film there. The other thing we did was we did a series of screenings for high school kids from townships. We hired somebody to put these screenings on, and occasionally Albie would get to go. Well, he was treated like royalty. after these kids had seen this film. So I think I really didn't, making the film, I did not appreciate how it might land in South Africa with young people. And I would say that one of the great gifts of the film, in terms of it coming back to me, was that. And so, as I said, I couldn't possibly imagine it, and you know, I'm incredibly grateful that this film has had its own life in South Africa.
And if I can mention that after you'd gone, I went to the University of the Free State. It's right in the heart of, the equivalent would be southern states here. One of the most depressed part of South Africa within apartheid. And now the majority of students are black. The film is shown there, and the president of the student union gets up afterwards. She said she's so thrilled to have seen this film because it tells her what you can do if you are privileged. It's telling her now. She wasn't saying because a white is fighting against. She was seeing now she's privileged compared to her family people who are poor. And she sees this film now as giving inspiration to her. And I feel particularly thrilled that it's in that sense, the being in the struggle and capturing those qualities, those human qualities that people can identify with, led her to make that statement.
Well, that's what, so this is my last question, and then I'll ask it, and then feel free to stand up and start coming down to queue up in front of the microphones. But the question of history is one that I think I want to end my questioning portion on. I think obviously the relevance of the film in South Africa. After 20 years since the end of apartheid, reliving that history of the liberation struggle, the transformation, the values. But I also saw in the film a serious attempt to grapple with the physical as well as moral, emotional, and legal and political legacies of the past unjust society. And we talk about it here when we talk about our monuments and what to do with them, and the way in which the new constitutional court was built on, literally built on the grounds of the symbolic embodiment of the apartheid regime. And I love the shots of the art within the constitutional court building, transforming those spaces. I love the shots of the people pouring in as compared to de Klerk and all his finery, on the floor of the parliament. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about how in a society that even if a vote transforms overnight who sits in the chair of the president, its physical space as well as the lived histories can't be erased so quickly and have to be lived with, can't be ignored, can't be brushed over. They occupy a place in our collective consciousness and in our physical world. Can you say something about how you negotiate, how you go to that court every day, what it means to you, and what it might mean to another society who attempts to look out at its living history in a new way?
I've written about this specific issue. Why did I feel such a sense of elation when I went to work every day? It was something, a kind of an uplift, very, very special. I thought, okay, the court is in an area that connects up Hillbrow, which is densely populated, overcrowded, problematic in many ways, with the northern suburbs, beautiful, not a poor person in sight, and then bureaucratic Bloemfontein, site of government. Three worlds are connected up by the court that are worlds normally separated, and we act as the connector. And I might mention there are no fences around. Security at first wanted us to build high walls, fences. People walk past there night and day on their way to work, kids going to school. There's a thin ribbon of glass through the chamber of the court where we see the knees of people walking by. And I always joke, this is your truly non-racial, non-sexist world, because you only see the knees and you can't tell if it's a he or she or black or white. but deliberately like that. I felt, okay, these are great, but that's not why I'm feeling that sense of uplift. Then I thought, okay, the site of the court in the old prison, we say with a dubious pride, we have the only prison in the world where both Gandhi and Mandela were locked up. No one else can make that claim. And that's where we put the court. And when I deal now with the removal of statues and so on, I say, don't remove them, confront them. Have other artwork that challenge them. Becomes a new artwork, challenge them with today's sensibility and eyes, and draw lots of people into the jury that will decide what kind of artwork to have. I think that's more productive, and it gives you the last laugh on the people who were crowing a century or so ago. I thought, okay, that's powerful. It's turning negativity into positivity. You can take, we learn about turning a sword into a plowshare. You can take the sword and throw it away. But you take that same metal and you turn it into a plow. That's powerful. And that's us, the beautiful ones who are not yet born. We're not going to have people from Mars to be the beautiful people. It's us. We have to transform ourselves. I think, okay, that's meaningful. That's great. And then we have an international competition. We get that beautiful, fantastic building, a decolonial building before decolonization was even in the air. That's great, but there's something else happening here. And then I realized most of South Africa, everywhere I go, I feel I'm a white person in a white area, a white person in a black area. When I went to that court, I felt I'm Albie going to work. Just me. It's a kind of, you know, the streets, the architecture, the feeling, the quality of South Africa. It's not just the poor black townships and the wealthier areas. There's just something you still feel associated with race. It's impregnated into the very style and presence and physicality of our cities and of our rural areas. I went to the court, and it's a building, it's a space, it's a team, liberated. I'm me, and that's what gave me that sense of elation, of special quality. So that's an indirect parable, if you like, responding to the question you asked. And we're dealing with those issues now. In the universities, one of the biggest battlegrounds of the universities is over what's called decolonization. Nobody quite knows what it is, but they know it's something that's there. It's very real for those who experience the relics of the colonial. And it can be in the names, it can be in the pictures on the wall, it can be in the physical architecture, but it's also in your points of reference in teaching. And then it's relatively easy to say, okay, we don't have to start with Greece and Rome and then leap through 1,000 years to England, to Britain, and then to the 20th century in the United States and the North as our points of reference in terms of history and ideas and so on. But it's more than that. It's style of teaching, it's pedagogy, it's attitudes that all have to be dealt with. They're being dealt with now. And it's problematic and it's difficult and it's uncomfortable. And lots of people who were terrific as academics, denouncing apartheid in the struggle days, are now the targets because they seem to be still teaching in the old way with the old expectations, even if the content is progressive. So these are ongoing battles in South Africa. They're lively battles. I like to feel the universities are strong enough to contain the surge and to benefit from it, and that the students who are at the forefront of the surge are sharp enough and thoughtful enough to develop a sense of history, to know when you consolidate the gains that you've made, and to get on with their studies, which is always important, and their parents and their families want them to get their degrees and so on, but at the same time not to lose that passion. And I'll just end with this. When I spoke to about 200 law students last year, the surge was really beginning to become very great. I said, it sounds like the height of narcissism, but when I look at you, I see 200 young Albie Sachses here. And I really felt that.
In a good way.
Well, I like myself.
You meant that as a, I'm just clarifying, you meant that as a compliment.
I saw that passion, the idealism, the questing, the excitement. And it's the excitement not just about ideas, it's about being alive. It's about doing something. It's about your connection with destiny. You're not just taking things for granted and going along and maneuvering to make the best of things. You're challenging the things. You don't know if you want to make the best of those things because you're challenging those things, and that's exciting.
So, questions? Come on down. There's two here. We'll get them switched on for you.
I feel humbled to be in your presence. Thank you for everything you've done. And your film is just brilliant. I'm saddened that in my K-12 education.
Can people hear at the back?
I was just saying that I feel humbled in your presence. And thank you for everything you've done. And also that your film was just brilliant. And I feel badly that in my K-12 education in New York City public schools, I never heard about South Africa. I never heard about Japanese internment camps. And what I learned, was abysmal about the world. I had to go to grad school in a totally different field, but to learn about this. I also wonder if you have any comments about America's current presidency. I hate to call the president of our country by name, and I don't have anything good to say, so rather than saying more, I'll just wonder if you have any thoughts about that. Thank you.
Can we take a few questions?
Sure. So why don't we go to this side? I don't know if you can see that. Go ahead and move that out.
That sounds like it's us.
Hi. So I do research and teaching on human rights education in the United States, and I've done a bit in South Africa. And I have a South African colleague who has done some research on the decolonization of schools like the University of Cape Town, and he has found that a lot of student activists are rejecting the human rights framework, the human rights language, saying that they're not considered human, so why should they embrace this framework? And I'm really curious about your thoughts on that, and where you think that comes from, and whether you think that is a useful idea. Thank you.
Maybe we'll take one more, and I'll ask our friends in Stanford. Oscar, do you have a question that you want to throw into the mess? You've been so patient out there engaging us.
Sure, when the opportunity comes, I will ask a question. Is that opportunity now?
The opportunity has arrived.
We've been interrupting the show earlier, so I apologize for that. We had some technical difficulties. In any event, my question would be, Albie, what did you hold on to in all these years that allowed you to be so strong and to come back? That as we go through these, not similar, but somewhat of a trying experience here in America, to try and test our resolve to be a civil society, what kept you going? That's my question. What did you hold on to?
Thank you.
Okay, these are three really great questions. I'm not going to answer about your president. I'll just say that the world is watching the US, and lots of wonderful things have come from here. Speaking as a lawyer, the decision in Brown Board of Education in the 1950s, I was a law student then. It inspired me then, it inspired me now. Not just the decision, but the role of the judge. Thinking with deep humanity, That's an America that people love. America, people who don't stand for conduct that involves disrespect for human beings. America that appreciates and loves the vitality, the diversity that comes from the differences of people and so on. This is the America that we admire and love. And it's really up to yourselves to decide how you're going to respond to difficulties that you might see. And it's partly, even during the anti-apartheid struggle, we would argue that the university should divest. We would welcome the support from faith communities, lab unions and others. But we didn't get into deep arguments about foreign policy. And I was asked in Mozambique in 1985, somebody had been sent by, is it George Schultz? They used to have university people advising the State Department. Now they had a risk analyst from the insurance industry. What's the risk of revolution in Southern Africa? In any event, he comes to see me and he said, what do you have to do to get the ANC to speak to the State Department? They were worried that if the State Department said we're willing to listen to you, there would be repudiation, American imperialism, we don't speak to them and so on. I laughed. I said, all you have to do is to get the ANC to speak is open your mouth and allow air to pass over your vocal cords. And the Honorable style was to be respectful, to listen, to link up with people who are trying to bring about change, but not to go in for denunciations. And I feel particularly as a former judge, a certain protocol is required of me, not to get too involved in the very partisan and dynamic internal politics. A lot of people are disappointed. I don't sign on to petitions and so on. I work in my own particular way. In terms of the human rights, I can understand what the protesters are. We call them the fallists. Sort of roads must fall, fees must fall, colonial education must fall. They're the fallists. And when I was invited about 3 months ago to speak to 30 Palestinians who'd been invited to South Africa to learn from our experience about getting change, what you must do, what you shouldn't do, and so on. I didn't know who they were. I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want to know. I just saw them in the room. And I was introduced as Albie Sachs, had been fighting his whole life for human rights. And I said, no, that's not correct. Much of my life, I wasn't a human rights activist. I was a freedom fighter. And a human rights activist is often someone from outside trying to bring about improvements and so on, and validly so, and wonderfully so. A freedom fighter is from inside, who commits his life to the freedom struggle. And it wasn't captured then by human rights activist phrase. And they just lit up. They understood what I was getting at. They don't want just civil rights and an improvement and this and that and the other. They want, as they see it, they want a dignified state, Palestinian state. And I think because they saw that I understood this, then the way I spoke about we never used torture, we didn't go in for terrorism, and so on, that message would be more meaningful than if I was simply somebody speaking from the lexicon of human rights who wants certain standards where they feel they're being imposed on others. But what's interesting is the fallists run to court to try and get an injunction, to get people out on bail, and to try and get restraining orders against police, military coming onto the campus. So there's often a contradiction in what they say
and what they do in practice. And there's nothing wrong. Our lives are full of contradictions. We learn from contradictions, managing contradictions. And so this is an ongoing kind of project for them. And even the attitude to the Constitution is undergoing quite profound changes. Many of them feel Mandela sold out. He was too nice to the whites. And it's repudiating that whole project. But now when the Constitutional Court is giving judgments, holding our president to account in very vibrant ways and revitalizing Parliament, they feel right on. They're very excited by the Constitutional Court and by the idea of having a constitution.
What kept you going?
Yes. Hi there in Stanford. Is that Stanford University?
No.
Oh, okay.
It's UConn and Stanford.
Stanford with an F.
Oh, okay. If it had been Stanford University, I would have said the joke about the bomb being meant not for interest, meant for me, that was told at Stanford University. And the laughter was at Stanford University. What kept me going? I think it's a mixture of different things. Because it wasn't just me. What kept Mandela going? Sisulu, Dennis Goldberg. I think there's something personal. But I think what was important is we were part of a movement, of a culture. And I think the fact that this morality of freedom was so deep was very important. It provides a resilience you don't get. If they torture you and you torture back, then it's just a question of strength. And you feel weak at times, and you feel strong at times. That doesn't provide for durability. But if it's that strong moral conviction, for some people it came from their religious beliefs and faiths, for many of us who were secular, it came from faith in human beings, perfectibility of human beings, it came from struggle. I think that was the main thing. There were moments when I was in detention, solitary confinement, where I was ready to break. If the interrogators had timed it, if they'd known, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here today. Maybe I would have collapsed completely. They used sleep deprivation against me. It did crack me up. Crack me up in the sense of not the nice inducing laughter, but cracked me up morally and physically. And I've never quite got over that. But, and you know, it's strange when you're locked up there. The words like freedom, justice, they mean nothing. They're far away, they belong to another world. You're in this tiny microcosm of solitary confinement with some guards around you. There's just a kind of little bit of guts that remained. That I'm not giving in to them. I don't even know what it's all about. I'm not giving in to them, I'm holding out. That kind of kept me going through those particular moments. But by and large, I would say what gave us huge strength in South Africa was belonging to a struggle that we believed in, that wasn't just for power, it was for justice, that was very, very meaningful, and gave us a tenacity and a resilience that enabled us to survive. Not everybody did. Many people cracked up again. They broke. People gave way. They gave evidence for the state. People just wanted to give up. Enough already. But what was remarkable about our movement was its durability, not just me as an individual. 30 years in exile, and Oliver Tambo comes back, and ANC largely intact, the world on our side, a sense of kind of victory. That's what we achieved, and that's what kept me going. At the very personal level, I remember when I wrote Self-Vengeance of Freedom Fighter, I went to Portugal, and it was translated Vingança Suave. And my Portuguese friends asked me that question, and they wanted to know, where did you get it from, you as an individual? And my dad was a trade union leader, well-known public figure, a great fighter. And I thought I got those qualities from him. And then I realized every quality I described actually came from my mother. She was deferential and quiet. I got her to write her biography, to dictate it, and we called it Memories of a Revolutionary Typist. And she said, why me? I'm not important. I wasn't important. I said, Mom, that's exactly why it should be you. You're somebody who was there. You weren't an important figure. But I realized a certain kind of humor, a resilience, a getting through difficult times, a quietness I got from my mom, not from my dad. So at that purely personal level, I have to say thank you, Mom.
All right, so we'll take a few more. We'll start on this side. And
Thank you for an incredible movie and your inspiring life. It's really amazing. I'm a former public defender, and I was so glad to see the death penalty part in your film. When I was in law school, I had the pleasure and inspiration to be in South Africa the year Mandela came to power, and it was phenomenal. And I love your constitution. It's just the best constitution. Anyway, I was just wondering, I remember when that case came out, and I so wish our court would follow suit and abolish the death penalty. But I remember it involved 2 police officers being killed, if I'm remembering correctly, and I thought, isn't that smart? They took the worst case scenario to abolish the death penalty. I was wondering if you could talk about what the deliberations were like. I don't know if you're allowed to do that, about that case, that landmark case. Did people agree?
She wants to know about your deliberations around the death penalty case.
What did the Constitutional Court justices think? Were you in agreement? Was it, I mean, Brown versus Board of Education, they wanted to be unanimous. You guys were also unanimous, if I'm remembering correctly.
Give me some paper there. Not a tissue. So you want to know about
How you decided?
How we dealt with the death penalty.
How were the deliberations? Did you all agree?
Okay.
Was it an easy case, or
Okay.
was it?
thank you.
Let's take another one.
Hi, so everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, my name is Winston. I'm a sophomore in the Human Rights
Talk into the mic.
Sophomore in the Human Rights House. Does everyone hear me now?
Uh-huh.
Did I shut this
I
off?
think you might have moved
Oh,
on.
okay.
That's all right.
Hello? Testing,
Yeah,
1, 2,
better.
3.
Good.
Yeah, so I was, oh, okay. This one?
Yeah.
Alright, testing, 1, 2, 3, okay, great. So hi, my name is Winston. I'm a sophomore in the Human Rights House, and I want to thank Ms. Ginsburg and Judge Albie for sharing their experiences with us. My question actually comes out of a moment in the movie when Judge Albie comes back to South Africa, and there's this elation in the country about how everything's going to go well. And from my experience in prior high school history classes, it would be, and everything went well from there. There was a happy ending. But what I loved in the movie was that Ms. Ginsburg actually showed the process that had to be undertaken to get there. And that's really what I drive at, because there are usually 2 phases when it comes to any kind of shift in culture. You really have to have a legislative shift, but that doesn't really change the minds and culture of the people until you actually engage with communities. And I saw Ms. Ginsburg show a lot of those beautiful moments there. And in the history of apartheid, even though there was this legislative shift where it was abolished, there was still a lot of people who grew up with it and were immersed in the same culture and had trouble trying to shift their minds to correspond with that legal shift. I was wondering, Judge Albie, since you were in the primary legal side of things, how you tried to engage with communities, what your goals and process were for trying to shift the minds of the people to correspond with legal shifts.
That's a good question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Justice Sachs, I have a question concerning your role as a constitutional judge. I'm a law student from Germany, and the day after the election of Donald Trump, Our professor for constitutional law opened his lecture with the words, "Tonight the world got a little bit colder, but now is the time of law." Would you agree to this statement? So, do you think that the judicial branch can defend a liberal democratic society against the government that maybe tries to undermine it, not only in regards with the United States, but also what happens in Poland right now?
Okay.
Do you want to go?
Okay, so the death penalty case, you saw Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg commented on it. It was our first case, and there were 400 people on death row because we'd had a moratorium. Before, while we were negotiating, the ANC wanted abolition. The then South African government couldn't imagine a state that didn't kill its citizens. We couldn't imagine the new democracy where this would happen. And we couldn't get agreement. So we couldn't postpone the first democratic elections because we couldn't agree. So we decided to leave the issue to the Constitutional Court. Our Bill of Rights is open on the topic. To leave it to the Constitutional Court. And it might be that courts would say, this is a hot political issue, it's not for us as judges to decide, it's for the elected representatives of Parliament. And I think at that stage, the elected representative of Parliament would have struck down capital punishment, ANC, big majority, Mandela providing. But that wouldn't have stopped another government changing and people campaigning to bring about legislative change. So it was fair and square on us. We developed the principle very early on, and I think it still applies to the court. We don't discuss the case in advance of the hearing. Each judge, we have our law clerks, we do our own research, the arguments are presented, and then we would go behind the court and have a very open discussion. We had workshops, round and round the table. And the first issue we would decide is this appropriate matter for the court to decide, or does it belong to the legislature? Even before we get to the merits. We discuss it, we discuss it, we discuss it, and in view of our very special history in South Africa, we felt the court actually had been indicated to do that, we deal with that. And then we get to the merits. And we debate, we don't, and we go around the table, it's clear every single one of us is against capital punishment. And we feel it's unconstitutional. Not that we're against it, only we feel it's clearly unconstitutional. The country that's envisaged by our new democratic constitution, that has fundamental rights, that speaks about human dignity, equality, freedom, just can't have capital punishment. But that's just a broad sense that we have. The Chief Justice then writes a magnificent opinion. It's the first opinion he'd ever written. He'd never been a judge before. He'd had a huge legal practice. He was the most sought-after advocate. You saw him there. He'd been in Mandela's trial, when Mandela was nearly sentenced to death. And he set up the Legal Resources Center, gave up private practice, in order to prepare the way for a new South Africa. And people joined the firm because it meant something different to be a lawyer. You didn't have to go into private practice and make as much money as you can and be as competent as possible. In any event, he wrote this magnificent judgment, looking at position all over the world, introducing something completely new to us that still hasn't been adopted in the United States, proportionality, which is really the foundation of almost all our legal work, and constitutional courts, Supreme Courts throughout the world use proportionality. Canada, in fact, was very useful for us. We looked at Canada quite a lot. Japan uses it. Germany uses it. In fact, the idea was originally developed in Germany. Namibia used it. Zimbabwe was using it. We used it in South Africa. He wrote all that. And basically came down to the position. He said there are 3 justifications for punishment. and the one is prevention, the one is preventing the crime, and he said you can prevent people by locking them up for life. The second is rehabilitation. If you execute the person, you can't rehabilitate. The third is deterrence, and that was the main argument for the state. Mandela sent George Bezos, that advocate whom we saw there, to argue against capital punishment. De Klerk was in his government of national unity, fought very hard for capital punishment. Mandela apparently was very rude and just said, I'm sending advocate on behalf of the government to oppose capital punishment. And the main argument then, we had somebody from the state to defend capital punishment, was deterrence. And he said it's almost self-evident. The threat of being hanged is going to save not the life, it's not the life just of the accused person, but the lives of other people in future. That was the main argument. There was one interesting moment. You know, you see in movies, counsel is addressing the jury here, maybe the bench, and they keep turning around looking to the door at the back. And the counsel for the state kept looking around. And eventually somebody comes in with a piece of paper and he picks it up, a big smile on his face. We've just heard that the legislature in New York State has decided to reintroduce capital punishment. That was that marvelous moment for him. It didn't influence us, particularly one way or the other. In any event, he's relying on deterrence. And we received some studies that had been done that indicated that a long period in jail is as powerful a deterrent as capital punishment. On that basis, given that capital punishment, you can't reverse a mistake, it's a drastic penalty in itself. Applying proportionality analysis, it's disproportionately severe when another remedy can achieve the same results. Sends it round. That was before we were using emails. We get the hard copy. I agreed with him, but that wasn't why I was against capital punishment. Deterrence, we had it in the past. In the Cape, they used to nail people up on a cross, alive. They'd die slowly. The birds would come and peck at them. That's deterrence. When the British came, they stopped that because it was just unbefitting the society. It was a level of cruelty that the whole society was tainted. So hanging was seen as something beneficent, good. Now the idea of putting a rope around a person's neck, who's not fighting, he's not threatening you, and cold-bloodedly killing, or in America electric shocks, which is supposed to be better than hanging, or now putting poison, a medical person poisoning somebody to death, would be so abhorrent. That was why I was against it. It was denial of human dignity. Many of my colleagues used the phrase Ubuntu. It was Yvonne Mokgoro who spoke so beautifully in the film. Ubuntu is an African philosophical concept. I'm a person because you're a person. I can't separate my humanity from acknowledging your humanity. In that sense, the indivisibility of humanity. And if we kill somebody who's done something awful, in a sense, we're eliminating one of our fellow human beings who became like that partly because our society has failed. It doesn't justify what the person did. But we are producing people who can behave in such a cruel way. We must all take responsibility for that. And it ended up, I think, 6 of the judges referred to Ubuntu as being part of the philosophical background. I was keen not to use American jurisprudence, not only because it went all over the place and it was swinging now in '94 in favor of retention, but to say if we abolish capital punishment, it's not because we want to show liberal Americans that we're on your side. It's because we have our own sense of humanity. And I mentioned that it was significant in South Africa that many of the great traditional leaders had been against capital punishment in their traditional societies. Blood mustn't follow blood. And some of the first African intellectuals and lawyers writing on the subject took exactly that same position. And that connects up with this idea of Ubuntu. In warfare, there could be very cruel conduct. If people were suspected of being witches, but that was irrational behavior, they could be put to death. But in the African judicial process, by and large, capital punishment was not used. I emphasize that to prove the indigenous roots, if you like. And I felt that. And it's no accident that Mandela was against it. He didn't get it from nowhere or just from his own personal experience. He was tapping into African culture and society. In any event, I decided I wanted to write a concurrence, setting out my own views. It wasn't based on whether or not deterrence could be proven by studies done in America or Germany, wherever it was. It was based on the fact that the state doesn't kill in cold blood. That's why we don't have torture. It's not whether torture provides information or not. You don't do it because we are not torturers. The very culture, society we're trying to defend is based on the fact that we are not torturers. We don't kill people in cold blood. So it was unanimous. It wasn't popular, in the sense people didn't run out into the streets and say, hooray, hooray. But I think people, even those who still wanted capital punishment, and it was a majority view then, it's a majority view today, respected the fact that we reasoned our arguments. And that we weren't going for popularity. It's not a court that takes an opinion poll and then decides. The whole idea of fundamental rights is precisely to look after the basic rights of the most vulnerable, the least popular in society. We upheld the rights of prisoners to vote on that basis. When the government said they're unpopular, we'd rather spend the money on getting elderly people to the polling booth. Because they're unpopular, we said you cannot deny somebody that fundamental right to vote. Our whole struggle had been over the vote. South Africa was an independent country. One person, one vote was our equivalent of independence. And I wrote in the judgment that I wrote that the vote wasn't just a question of democracy and accountability. It said quite literally everybody counts equally through the vote. And we had to stress that point. And it's defending then unpopular people. When it came to striking down the law that made sodomy a crime, many people influenced by culture, by their faith communities and so on, were supportive of the idea of criminalizing. But we took a very clear position early on, and we had constitutional text to help us with that. And starting off with decriminalizing, the next phase was equality, and we arrived at gay marriages, a kind of progression as the society is accustoming itself to the changes 10 years before the US did. I saw some language that was used by Kennedy in your judgment that happened to echo language that we'd used. And I wouldn't say he necessarily read the decision. I'm sure counsel did and advanced that. So that's part of the question of remoralizing the society. On gender equality, very important case, particularly in the way we developed African customary law. Up here in North America, there'd been very fierce debates on customary law that was often tribal law, patriarchal, or the equality principles. And for the one to win, the other had to die. We didn't take that all or nothing approach. We took the approach of developing customary law, very important for people, but in keeping with the equality principles in our Constitution. So we struck down the principle of primogeniture, the eldest male inheriting. We struck down the principle that said the property belonged to the husband, and if the family broke up, it was really for his decision, which was the way customary law had been applied. And we struck down an idea that in terms that a woman could not be a traditional leader when the community wanted a woman to be a traditional leader. And what was wonderful to see the court filled with women who'd come down in buses from that area. And there were two bus loads, And the one busload went in from 10 to 11:15 and went out for the tea break. The other busload came in afterwards. I felt so thrilled to be in that court at that moment. And at the end of the day, the Chief Justice thanked the women, he didn't call them ladies, he thanked the audience for being so patient and listening so attentively to debates that were often very technical and in English. It wasn't their first language. He didn't say, I'm going to give you judgment, but it was his way of recognizing them and making them feel part of the project. So some people might say, well, African culture, African people, they prefer patriarchy. Well, they're people, and they're male people and female people. And here, female people, that's half of the population, they were in the court. They wanted change. And that was educative, I think, to the whole society to see that. So it's also the time we gave to explaining and justifying our decisions. It wasn't, we write, we know the law, that's so. And proportionality analysis, in fact, requires you to contextualize and to weigh up all the relevant factors. It encourages a far less syllogistic kind of reasoning, encourages far more contextualized, practical impact, balancing out of the different issues.
So Albie, I know we're actually at time, and we've got I know a question on the table still, and it's a little one. It is, will courts save us? I think, and I know there's a couple waiting for answers, so if you promise to find, after this we're going to excuse ourselves to the reception. If you promise to find us afterwards, I'm sure we can discuss your comments. So if you want to give a quick answer to whether the courts are going to save us or not, and then Albie, if you can also give us some final comments. That would be.
I'm going to give a very indirect response, following my Albie protocol, about commenting on presidents in other countries. When Barack Obama was elected, I was amongst the many people in the world absolutely overjoyed. He'd actually visited our constitutional court when he was Senator Obama. And I'd met him in Chicago, so I felt personal pleasure and joy. And the first black president, it was fantastic. I didn't have huge expectations. Not because I had any lack of faith in him. I just felt this American system is just so heavy and strong and intricate, it's difficult to bring about change. And I think what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And you can decide who's the goose and who's the gander. But I think then, in a sense, that's something that's hopeful. That same sluggish, entrenched, difficult to change system, if you like, that held back Barack Obama, could hold back the ambitions of another president, I won't mention any names, I'm speaking purely hypothetically, of another president who might wish to take bold initiatives. And I think the courts can play a role in that. It remains to be seen how much a particular court at a particular moment will do. But that would be quite interesting to see. It's not a given. In many countries in the world, unfortunately, the law is bent and manipulated. I was on the judges' vetting board in Kenya, where the judges were completely in the pockets of, almost literally in the pockets of, in the sense of taking money, taking phone calls from authority, and they played no role at all, positively. A week ago, the Kenyan Supreme Court struck down the elections. Very brave move.
That was really.
And that was a fantastic thing in a country where the judiciary had been one of the worst agents and created the greatest despair, because if even the courts are crooked, then you've got no hope at all. South Africa, our courts have been fabulous. I'm so proud of our constitutional court, but also the other courts. In Kenya, they were great. Whether Americans will feel proud of your courts, we'll have to see how they respond. Thank you.
Thank
conversation, ask more questions. Thank you all for coming.